Welcome to the State of the Nation. My name is Henry SSALI. We are delighted to have you here today. Before we start, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto African Alumni Association operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron, Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many indigenous people from across the Turtle Island, and we are grateful to work on this land. Thank you so much for joining us.
This is the State of the Nation. Rifa Uganda. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The State of the Nation with Henry SSALI.
All right. You got it from the State of the Nation. My name is Henry SSALI, and today I am delighted and honored to host three incredible panelists, two regulars and one new addition who is joining us today. Of course, is waking up for this show to give us some insights. He will be joining us as soon as he is ready. With that in mind, I would like to let you know that today we are interrogating a few questions, including what or how has the lockdown affected the people in Kampala? Can Ugandans manage to beat COVID-19 when they are hungry? Is the lockdown working or is it not? What must the government do? Without the government, we have an opposition government or the shadow government. Can the shadow government offer alternatives to the scourge, the COVID scourge? Are they going to help us navigate it better now that we do have a shadow government? What are your thoughts about the shadow government? Are they going to help us with the new Uganda? Those are all questions that are going to be interrogated here today. But we also had Mr. Honorable Kyagulanyi Ssentamu asking the international agencies to withdraw aid because aid apparently aids in the human rights violations in Uganda. Should international agencies withdraw aid? Can Ugandans survive without aid? Can the country survive without aid? With me in studio today, we have Mr. Julius Mitala Muzukulu wa Muswangali and George Wilobo. And I'm going to start with Mr. Wilobo to introduce himself and get into the conversation. Mr. Wilobo.
Yes, viewers, listeners, and greetings from where I am. My name is George Wilobo, and I will also add my name as the world. So at least I also want to be part of, I don't want to put my other one, it may scare people, but it is very long. My father's name is very long. But I'm here to deliberate in this particular platform to provide sight and to provide enlightenment in terms of what is taking shape in terms of conversations in the nation. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wilobo. Muzukulu wa Muswangali.
Thank you very much, Henry, as always, and greetings to you, my brothers. Greetings to all of you people, wherever you are following us from. It's always a pleasure, for me, for me, this has become like a Sunday passion for me. This is my church. It's my new church. So when you've not followed me the other side, you can be dead sure that you'll find me here, unless something happens and I'm not able to be here. Julius Mitala is my name. I prefer to go by the name Mitala Muzukuru wa Mswangali. I'm not like my brother George the World, who was scared of pronouncing his long extended name. George, I encourage you, we are the new Africans. We should be proud to assert ourselves and who we are. I know some people that I work with, my Nigerian friends or people who come from elsewhere. They have these long, elongated names. You can't even write it. If you give it a try to write it, you may fail to write it correctly. But that's besides the point. I'm glad to be here, and I hope that the conversation we are having tonight will be an interesting conversation. And let's bring it on. That's all I could say for the introductions.
I was hoping that you'd remind my brother, the world, Wilobo. I prefer Wilobo, and I probably would be more excited about his dad's long name, so-called long name. It would be nice to have those names.
Some of us have two fathers, so we have to combine the two names.
That's what makes you a real African.
Yes.
Actually, that's an interesting proposition, because in our African context, a child is born of the village. Everywhere you go, your neighbor is your father. The guy next to the shop is your father. So it's perfectly fine for you to adopt, a proper. But absolutely, you do what's right by you, George. Don't be.
Indeed.
Also within the Ugandan context, specifically the Buganda context, you never know who your dad is until your mother is dead. So,
exactly. That is very true. That's why I don't want to give it a chance.
So, anyways, getting back to the state of the nation affairs, we are still in the lockdown. We are not sure if the lockdown is actually we're given 42 days, right? We are not sure if we are actually counting those 42 days. It seems it seems to be that usually whenever the president is going to make a national address about COVID specifically, people are never sure if what they have been counting still counts until that press conference is done. So I'm hoping that it is actually indeed done. Counting down, but we shall see what happens. So far, it's all. I think it's about a week or so counting down. I don't know what you guys think. Has the lockdown been effective so far or not? What should we make of how the lockdown is evolving so far? Mr. Kizza Besigye, of course, had his own assessment of the lockdown and the government, on how the government is either effective or ineffective. I don't know what you have had. I do have a clip here of Mr. Kizza Besigye. I wonder if I should play it for you, or you just want to go ahead and put in your thoughts.
Go ahead and play the video.
All right.
Okubeesawo obulamu bwabwe
n'obasibira awaka nga tolina pulaani yonna. Okusooka pulaani ebalabirira ng'omanyi nti obulwadde buno obusinga obuyitirivu ennyo mu ggwanga buli mu matawuni. Kati amatawuni abagawangaaliramu bakola mmere ya leero, tebalina kye banaalya ng'obasibidde waka. Ze yakoze eggulo ze yalidde. Kati omugambye asigale waka aliye eki n'ekyenkya takiina. Okusiba abantu nga tolina pulaani gy'otaddewo okubalabirira kya bulabe buyitirivu eri abantu n'eri obulwadde bwennyini.
Besigye agamba nti Pulezidenti Museveni yakiragiddewo ti ne ku mulundi guno gavumenti ye tena kyeteekeddeteekedde bantu besindika mu muggalo, era ne ku mulundi guno bangi bagenda kubonaabona.
Kubanga pulaani zino zonna ze balangirira ziraga nti pulaani zaabwe za kuyamba bo teziina kulowolereza omuntu ali eno mu bantu aba bulijjo, tekiriyo. Y'ensonga lwaki owulira nga bagamba nti abalambuzi abava ebweru bajja kugenda mu maaso nga baanirizibwa batambule mu Uganda nga bwe baagala, kubanga baleeta ssente mu mawoteeri gaabwe, baleeta ssente mu kuwaba emmotoka zaabwe ezitambuza abalambuzi. So abo bo tebalina mutawaana, ng'abalala baggaliddwa awaka, bano bo batambule bali obulamu mu nsi yaffe.
Ono era avumiridde ne
Right. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's something that is it makes a lot of sense, but also very touching, and it's very emotional. You see, the COVID pandemic as for us now, we are treating it as it's reaching a point where there is state collapse, where you see symptoms of a state collapse. But prior to all this, we had very serious warnings. There were so many warnings that was actually given by the CDC and the Western governments and Western development partners that Africa is going to be hit most. But all these warnings were, of course, ignored. And these are very serious experts that come up with these statistics and this information. Now, it means that what we treated as the first wave of COVID-19 wasn't actually a wave. This is the true wave. This is the true first wave. It means that if the International Monetary Fund maybe took responsibility and gave out donation, the grant for Uganda as a government, and then that money was treated in terms of looking at the basic statistics that was given by the Ministry of Health, and they ignored the outcome or whatever that was going, the foreseen crisis by the CDC and all these other partners and the Western governments. It shows you how our government, they work within, like they eat like there is no tomorrow. You've ever had a family where when you're eating and you want to eat chicken and you complete everything from the saucepan and until when you have no more, but you don't think of tomorrow. And that is what the government did. In terms of plan work, just as Mr. Besige said, this required a lot of stakeholder kind of involvement and engagements. You cannot completely lock down people and expect them to stay home hungry. Because I think I mentioned this before, and this is common, that an hungry person is very angry. Now, where it will reach, people will be deliberately defying the SOPs that would actually work, but they defy not because they are stubborn, but it's because they have no alternative. They must provide for their families. They must eat, because you have two crises. You have the pandemic, yes, but you also have the hunger. But most importantly, you have poverty. So people are so frustrated, and you have government officials that would be giving assurance to the population, coming out to parliament to make statements of accountability to the population, to the entire country, and they are lashing out at the same people. They are lashing out, claiming like as though insinuating that ICU is meant for the rich. Now that is very absurd. How designation they are designating status of people in this crisis is very appalling. It means that most of the poor people that are living in Uganda are useless. They are not human. They are not treated as human. And actually, if you asked me, you've asked me that is this lockdown really effective? It is not effective at all, because there are so many breaches. Because if you gave a poor person, a common man in our village, in our suburbs, an alternative, and they could move within those alternatives and have hope that such and such will happen. But right now, you are categorizing and characterizing people, the vulnerable poor, and all these other things. How do you know that the money I received is actually was a payment of a debt? And how do you determine somebody who is vulnerable and somebody who is not by just virtue of mobile money coming into my account?
Well, I wonder what Mr. Mitala thinks. Do you agree with Mr. Wilobo? Is the lockdown effective? How should it be handled?
You know, Henry and George, I must admit, as I've always done, that I think everybody is dealing with a very difficult situation, and I think most of the things that the challenges that are emerging, from this COVID pandemic are probably things that have not been experienced before, or if they have been experienced before, we are dealing with a completely different sorts of problem, with the magnitude of a bit of a different, complexity. But what I want to agree with George, there's a couple of things. First of all, at the start of the pandemic, I think there was this projection from very credible media houses and very many various organizations who had projected that Africa was going to be bashed so badly by the pandemic. And I think when in the beginning, as the African people, and I think Ugandans, if I should say, if we compress it back to Ugandans, but Africa as a whole, I think we showed a bit of resilience. We showed some kind of the strength of being able to deal with a situation that we hadn't been dealt with before. And so many theories were brought up, around that subject. But I think for me, the way I'm looking at it is that there is a regulation. There's an international regulation which is called the International Health Regulation of 2005, which creates an obligation on states and nations to be able to take kind of preparatory action in terms of detecting pandemics and taking action to prepare on how to manage those pandemics. And I think Africa and Uganda was properly supported by various international organizations in order to be able to deal with those sorts of challenges. That's why in the beginning, as the pandemic began to evolve, Africa was not so hit, because I think we had just come out of the Ebola crisis and a number of so many other crises that had kind of tested, the agility, the ability of our states to be able to deal with those sorts of complex situations. But I think what has happened in this scenario, there is a bit of recklessness, there is a bit of carelessness on the part of the leadership as a whole, because whenever you look at an emerging problem and you don't square up what the challenge is, you end up missing some important steps and missing some important lessons that could have been used, to render our situation possibly in a better kind of direction. So I tend to agree with George, and I tend to agree with the sentiments that are espoused by Dr. Besigye. Our people are really going through very serious hardships, and it's not to say that people are stubborn. People are not stubborn. There is that kind of feeling that people always put up and say, oh, Ugandans are very difficult to deal with. They don't listen to rules, they don't follow directions, and so on and so forth. But there is lots of double standards. There is absolutely lots of double standards. And this is not happening just on this occasion. It's even happened in the beginning, where these travel permits and travel passes are misused. The handling of the situation is completely disorganized. There is lack of coordination. There is lack of transparency in the way things are done. You don't have anybody who is there to provide a clear, guidance on how a particular situation should be dealt with. In other countries, I'll give you an example. In Nigeria, in South Africa, in Rwanda, in Kigali, there has been some clear direction there. Leadership has stepped up. And I think this is a question that I raised there last week. And I said that if our leadership is not hell-bent on this micromanagement kind of exercise where everything has got to be managed by the head of state, maybe we would be seeing a different response, to the crisis that we are facing. And this means empowering the people who are technocrats in their own field, people who are professional, people who are experts, people who are well-trained to deal with issues of public health and pandemics. We are not short of those experts. We have lots of people who have, well qualified, in the area of public health management and things like that. But there is lack of coordination. Everything is coming, everything is politicized. And I think that's where the biggest problem is. That politicization of a health problem is what creates the kind of problem that we are seeing.
Actually, to add on that, you see the pandemic simply fell into the ditch of political crisis. When the stem is really rotten, the pandemic only exposed the rot in the political system of Uganda and the kind of leadership that we have. Because you see, whether we like it or not, Mr. Mitala is trying to bring in the politicization of the health crisis. But sometimes we cannot exclude actually the politics in this situation, because the political leaders are the decision makers of the nation. Now, if the decision makers of the nation are unable to come out with the very strong decisions and very clear guidelines for the population, so we are only being dictated upon by the address of President Museveni, say no more this, no more that. And yet there would have been a very good conversation in terms of engulfing everybody into the crisis, where everyone at least is able to survive the crisis, not like the one of, if you remember the one of 1990s, the HIV AIDS, where the brothers, at least a brother of a brother, a friend of a friend is dying helplessly without any solution. But this one here, at the time, there was no clear solution at the time. But this one here, at least we have solutions that were proven by the Western world, and was even given, there was support given. But after 35 years of rule, we are still going into the military dictatorship of the population. There is no more this. That sounds very, very crude to the population, especially population that survives hand to mouth. Because just as Kiza said, it's what I did today that will feed me, and tomorrow will have to cater for itself. And that is a common saying within the Ugandan population.
Yeah, I keep bringing up this comment right here. Do you think the government should rethink the lockdown or the way they implement the lockdown? Is it going to be helpful though? And I also want us to really think critically about where Uganda is situated within the region. And then compare why, for example, is Uganda hit so hard this time around when we're not hearing the same stories from Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi. Also keeping in mind that Tanzania in the first round of the pandemic did not do a lot or pretty much anything to even adhere to the World Health Organization recommendations to respect SOPs. Mr. Mitala.
It's really difficult to tell, because for me, what I sense is that, and I've already hinted on this. I think there is lack of transparency. There is lack of honesty. I think the world is not being, the people are not being given the proper picture. There must be some element of hiding numbers and dates and trying to kind of minimize the extent of the problem. Even though you don't have to be you don't have to be a genius to understand and to get to learn or to know the effects that the pandemic has had on our people. I'm pretty sure that even amongst ourselves here within our own circles, we are seeing news of dates being announced every day, every hour. There is no day that goes without you receiving a notice of death from somebody either close to you or somebody who is within your network, a friend or something who has lost a brother, a sister, a wife, or something like that. This is not a joke. People are really losing lives, and I think
they are losing lives, and
the leadership of the country should really take that as a serious matter. I'm disappointed that this doesn't seem to be the sort of catastrophe that you would expect it to be, because there is that lack of urgency in the responses that we are seeing. There's lack of that coordinated action, for the leadership of the country to come up together and say that, hey guys, look here, we have a national crisis and we've got to deal with it in this particular format. That is lacking. And what you have is that you've got these directions coming down from everywhere. Every minister has got a direction to give. Every RDC has got a directive to give. Every police commander has got a directive to give. It comes to a point where it becomes too much and too confusing. But the person who is really affected by the pandemic is possibly missing in the picture. And I think that's where really the crisis is.
Yeah, Mr. Wilobo, I remember last week, Dr. Zedriga said that the people should be consulted and other organizations, grassroots organizations, should be consulted. In the last 3 weeks here in Toronto, we have mourned more than 27 people. Within our community has lost at least 27 people in Uganda. What are your thoughts on how the lockdown is being managed in Kampala in comparison to how it is managed here in Toronto? You are muted.
There is a question you asked that why is it that in comparison of Kenya, Rwanda, and other neighboring countries, the East African community, they have not faced the kind of insurgency in this second wave. First of all, in the first wave, they have had their own share. And Uganda did whatever it could to make sure that they bar the infection rates to get into the country. However, this particular time, there was laxity. The laxity came about because this particular variant that we are talking about originated from India. Now, you remember that there was all countries around the world locked out India from getting into the country, including where we are. So that was a precautionary measure to prevent that dangerous variant to get in. But what happened in our country is that Uganda opened their borders, and most of the infected persons that were running from India, because they have relatives in Uganda, so they would be coming into Uganda. They went in full swing, and there was a full surge of people who were carriers of the virus, and they didn't know, and there were people who were just incubating the virus in them, and they had to explode the population with this current situation. Now, if that situation was handled at that stage, because remember, in Africa, the best, this is a cross-border kind of pandemic. So the best choice is to prevent it from entry. Now, you asked about the comparison between the Western world kind of lockdown and our situation in Uganda. First of all, BBC released a particular documentary in regards to how lockdown does not work in Africa, because we are set up in a communal kind of way. Traditionally, we are communal. Traditionally, we live in open spaces. Traditionally, we are not indoor kind of people. So by virtue of our traditional being, the lockdown feels like imprisonment. Now, it also signifies quite a lot of things, that in this particular West developed world, there are stakeholder consultations. People in power, they make decisions based on very, very informed research point of view, and also consent and consultation from the affected persons. But in Uganda, Mr. President Museveni works, just announces, I'm going to speak at the national address on COVID-19 at 8 p.m. without considering that there is somebody that slept in Chiboga but lives in Kampala. Effective immediately, there is a lockdown, there is no movement of this, there is no movement of that. So you can imagine the discrepancy. It is not heard of anywhere where leaders do not consider the population that they serve, or that actually are the epicenter of their being. In other words, people are supposed to be consulted in terms of, how do we go from here? How will people react? How will this decision affect this person and the other person? Well, it's a pandemic. It requires crisis kind of decisions. But even if it's a crisis kind of decisions, we have so much of expertise in our government and in our country, but they are not put into use. It's a one-man show, and it's kind of centralized into one individual called President Yoweri Museveni, and where the institutions that are supposed to be responding, because as a president, he is not even supposed to be addressing the country with regards to COVID-19. You have a task force at the top. You have Ministry of Health. You have the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Health. You have the expatriates that advise the president. You have the institutions of research and learning. You have all these resources at your disposal to make very sound decisions, and they can actually take up the forefront of all this that is going around. However, what happens in our country, as opposed to here, people do everything in their power to please one individual, to please the president, that they are working. Now, in so doing, they live outside the population. They live without any resonation with the population, because it beats understanding where a whole permanent secretary speaks as though they do not have relatives or friends and friends of relatives who are actually infected and affected by this pandemic, but they are acting just simply to like implement the guidelines by President Yoweri Museveni, and yet they are supposed to be the ones who are providing the guidelines. So instead of providing the dictation of President Yoweri Museveni, the Ministry of Health is the one which is mandated to give some of these guidelines. But right now, the police officer the police officers have staged, of course, roadblocks, and there is no quote of Ministry of Health. They speak presidential directive.
What are your thoughts, Mr. Mitala?
I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that, we are dealing with a military dictatorship where, the idea of democracy does not really work. This idea that you've got ministers who can be able to sit in a cabinet, and be able to take collective action, make collective decisions, that is a dream. It's a dream far, far, too far-fetched. I wouldn't even want to go there. But what I want to say is here is that, you know, lockdowns do serve a purpose. And the purpose they serve is that they slow down the spread of the disease or the spread of the virus. It's just like a quarantine. When you've got, you know, cattle in a certain region that's been hit, you know, by a certain disease, in order to protect, you know, farmers from another part of the country, you've got to introduce a quarantine to slow down the movement of the virus or the movement of that particular disease. So lockdowns in that respect, they do serve a purpose. And I think where it has been done effectively. Back in the beginning of this situation here in London, you know, the city was cut off, everything stopped, you know. And I think it came really down to a selected few people who were actually allowed to move, you know, in the city. You know, shops, bars, everything had to lock down, and people actually left the city and they went and lived in the villages. And the effect was very clear. It slowed down the pandemic, you know. So the idea of locking down, of introducing lockdown is not.
I can see you. But I can see you emphasizing the slowing down of the pandemic. But in the case of Uganda, do you think they can effectively slow down the pandemic when there is no mass testing or mass immunization for that matter, especially given the fact that we don't even have the medication right now?
I think at the risk of sounding kind of repetitive, because this is the matter that we've already discussed here, and I think last week we touched this, and we said that one of the problems that the country has experienced is there's this massive deception. It's a massive fraud. In my words, I want to call it a massive fraud, because we know, everybody knows that money was solicited, well-meaning Ugandans donated, companies, organizations donated a lot of money. Money was received from Parliament, allocated a lot of money to go into things like PPEs, you know, and you know, those kind of you know, mass testing, but it wasn't done, you know. And of course, the fault can only, the finger can only be pointed at a particular direction where, you know, it's very obvious where the problem is. If there was really accountability, and if the leadership really cared about people, if this was an issue about saving lives, I'm pretty sure that people would have done what is required, whatever is required to save lives. But for whatever reason, this became a political issue. Some others identified the mechanism of making quick money out of the system, and that's how it's been. That's how the whole issue has been conducted. And where that has left other people who are really vulnerable is you know, the increase in the number of deaths that we've seen. And I think for me that's really, really heartbreaking. But
George, what are your thoughts on that? Especially, I think in regard to slowing down the spread.
Slowing down the spread has been tested before, and Uganda is not new to actually pandemics, because if you remember in 1980s, there was that the 1990s, there was that AIDS, the AIDS, HIV/AIDS surge, which of course they tried the lockdown. But you see, the problem with the lockdown is that there is no lockdown that works. Actually, I also want to clear out my my earlier submission. I'm not trying to insinuate that lockdown do not work in Africa. They do work, but when they are done in a consultative way and with the consent of the people affected, and it can only work with the local people fully engaged in the planning work and implementation of the pandemic, just like it happened in the AIDS pandemic, epidemic, where the health officials they bring out a drive where you know your epidemic, which is HIV/AIDS, you know your response, and you know how to act upon it. So if that was able to work then, why not now? It's just because right now people have lost trust in their leaders, trust in what they tell them, and you see, when they lose trust, they will not be able to follow any form of direction that is given, because they feel it's a fallacy. It's something that they're doing that is just disrupting their daily activities. But in actual sense, I want to confer that it's actually up to the level of bringing this pandemic to the faces of Ugandans as it is right now, where people are dying left, right, and center, and they know their responsibility. But only the challenge that must be addressed. This is not lamentation. It is actually a disease that we have, as I may generalize that as African leaders, as Africans, that we have leaders that do not care much about the people, but they care more about their own interests and the interests of their loved ones and the people in power, but and also keeping the power itself other than the people that vote them into power.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wilobo.
This is the state of the nation. Rifa Mwanga. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The state of the nation with Henry SSALI.
Thank you so much for following us. As we move forward, Mr. Mitala, let us transition into the shadow government. There's a newly unveiled shadow government. Mr. Wilobo has been talking about consultative politics, and you are saying that given the fact that we are in a dictatorship, that is like a fallacy. Talking about consultations and stuff. Do you think that this new opposition will bring in a new era of consulting or having conversations with the incumbent government so that they can arrive to solutions that actually help Ugandans? Is there hope given the new shadow government? Do you see any kind of insightful consultations that this?
I like and I applaud and I love the spirit of the new shadow government that has been unveiled. You know, it's a good mix of people who are talented, and it looks, you know, across all the board. I've seen people there from FDC. I've seen a few other people from other parties. So that inclusiveness is helpful and it's useful, you know, in order to cultivate the journey to having a national dialogue. Because obviously, you know, the matters of the state, they are not about an individual. You know, when you're talking about the state, you are looking at the country as a whole. You know, what is in the interest of the country? I think what is in the interest of the country at the moment is for us as a nation to be able to have that, you know, reasonable, you know, meaningful conversation with each other and agree the things that can take us forward and the things that cannot take us forward maybe can be delayed. So I do like the composition. It looks very appealing. It looks very attractive. And as I've said, there are some capable people in there whom I believe they will be able to execute the duties that they have been given. But you know, does the government of the day, you know, harbor the same spirit? I highly doubt, because I think, contrary to what Mr. Museveni always wants to say, that he works in a kind of a broad-based kind of, you know, style. I mean, the facts speak very differently for themselves. Except, I mean, Mr. Museveni is very comfortable with people working with him if they are going to toe the line. If they are going to be puppets and just follow, you know, what he says, and that's it. It's not questionable. What the big man says is the final order of the day. You know, your input is not really important, and so that's where I do have that worry. And
Mr. Wilobo, what are your thoughts on this?
There is a common saying that when you operate in around the garbage area, there is no way that you will prevent stench from entering your house. It explains the kind of the environment that the opposition leaders are operating in is equated to that kind of garbage stench. Now, when you have a system which is strongly embedded as the national resistance movement, there is always that it will it will penetrate into your own systems. And you've seen along the years, from the time they made the first 3 legislative council, if you remember, before in the colonial times. Now, those people, if you went into their mind, they had very, very strong mindset. People that brought in that negotiated the independence of Uganda, they were very, very seriously, and like they had very serious integrity, and they had the heart of the country in them. Now, from that time up to the time of Dr. Samuel Gerald, you will see that there was some strong, opposition, even to the extent that it was banned. Because the first leader of opposition, I think, was in 1958. Now, if you look at that kind of, they had a very strong backup, and they could show a lot of emphasis and putting government at check at all times. Now, that went on to the extent that it was a threat to the government that came next, and they ended up bundling the entire process of choosing leader of opposition and anything to do with the shadow government. But if you also see now, from the time of the first leader of opposition, Dr. Samuel Gerald, and his shadow cabinet, and then the rest of those that followed up to about the 7th parliament and the 8th parliament, at least there, you would see a lot of very competent, strong-willed people that were at the forefront of all those things. Now, this particular and current shadow government, it is not far away from how Museveni also elects his own cabinet, because there are quite a number of factors that, of course, lead to the appointments. You cannot rule out loyalty if you are in the leading opposition party, for example. They would not be able to give if you do not have strong loyalty to the principle, and then you cannot also expect them to elect those that because you would see people like the Semujus that are very critics. In this particular shadow government, you will see the critics like the Semuju Ngandas. You will see critics like the Nsereko Mohammed, my friend. You will see such people in this particular shadow government, but you're not seeing them. Why? There is a criteria of appointment, but in a nutshell, they seem to be people that would, of course, have the another form of experience in terms of the dockets and the positions that they have given them, because I expected like Abdu Katuntu, who went into as an independent, at least he would have had a position in checking as the Attorney General. At least he would have that position to make sure that he continues with the previous experience that he had gained throughout the years he has been in Parliament. And this time round, of course, there are people that you would see the leader of opposition in the name of Mpuga. His wish list, if we went into the wish list of Mpuga, I would not think that the current shadow cabinet, 80% of the shadow cabinet wish list of Mpuga is not the same. Reason being, there are those really that speak truth to power, and there are those that are frankly critics of particular divergence from the opposition kind of ways. But I want to also reflect, just like Mr. Mitala did, that they did a good thing to balance. And actually, if you look at it, there is a regional balance. They were trying to do a party balance, and there is also the loyalty balance, and making sure that everybody is happy. And in that kind of regard, you see that at least they have challenged the previous leaders of opposition, where they had even lesser mix of other political parties, and for this particular 2021 cabinet, shadow cabinet, you can see at least a vast out of the 32 positions, you will see at least 19, of course, taken by NUP, and the rest dividing the few.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting that you are both endorsing a diverse cabinet that was unveiled by Mr. Mpuga, the leader of opposition. Yet, in most cases, when Mr. Museveni taps into the likes of Sevugwao, Betkanya, or Nachiyinji, that always becomes a problem, becomes problematic. You're always condemning the people who accept those positions. For example,
Owekitiibwa
wangi
kuliko okulondebwa
nkale sebo mwe bali kunsabira
towekitiibwa mu kifo kino kyogenzeemu obuganda busuubire ki
bingi nnyo kubanga bingi tubadde twagala nga tetubifuna nga tuli wala naye omanyi bw'oba olina kyoyagala beera kumpi osobole okukirwanirira era osobole okukifuna. Bw'osaba ng'olagiriza bulagiriza kiba kizibu nnyo, naye bw'osaba ng'oli kumpi nga n'ekyosaba olabira ddala kyanguwa, era n'oli eyandibadde agaana akaluubirirwa obutakikuwa.
Owekitiibwa waliwo abalala babaddeyo naye era obwakabaka ne busigala nga bukyabanja ebintu byabwo.
Ndowooza nze siri nga bo, toyinza nze kungeraageranya n'abalala, ekyo oba okoze ensobi nnene nnyo kubanga nze ndi mu Buganda munda n'ebyenkoze bingi nnyo, era bwongeraageranya mpulira ennaku nenga nti bano abantu tebasiima, mujjukire muleme kwerabira, mujjukirenga, era bwongeraageranya n'abalala nkunyiigira.
Owekitiibwa bannabyabufuzi abamu bwe badde batunuulira ensonga.
Nze nti ndi wanjawulo, kyeŋŋambye nti temujjukira, nze nakwata ekisumuluzo n'enzigulawo bulange ffenna ne tuyingira.
Anti Owekitiibwa tulabye baminisita bangi abalondebwa oluvannyuma.
Alex, njogedde Luganda olutegeerekeka, tongeraageranya n'abantu balala, nkwegayiridde please, beera fair. Nze mukyala nzekka eyali ku kakiiko akateesa ne gavumenti eya wakati okutukomezaawo ebyaffe.
Owekitiibwa kati FDC wagivuddemu okyagirimu?
Nazze kuweereza abantu bonna abantu bwe badde mpeerereza mu FDC era be bamu be ngenda okuweereza neeno gyendi, tewaliwo njawulo. Gavumenti y'emu, gavumenti be bantu, badde mpeereza abantu bonna, nze sisosola. N'olwekyo bwe mumbuuza ekyo mba sikitegeera kuba nze sirabawo njawulo gye mbadde ne bano bengenda okuweereza balabamu njawulo.
Owekitiibwa abeebuuza engeri pulezidenti yakola mu bantu abangi oba n'okuluuta.
Omanyi abantu abo batulaba, obalaba tebatulaba, bamanya omukozi.
Owekitiibwa ogenze minisitule eyabyamawulire ne bannamawulire tulaba nga batulugunyizibwa bya
ab'amawulire kati balaksinge bafunye mami maama ntuuse, maama Kamala byonna ntuuse, abo abaana bange bonna njagala nnyo okulaba nga bali bulungi, njagala kulaba muntu akaaba, abo abaana bato.
Naye bano ebitongole ebikuuma ddembe ebibatyoboola ebibalemesa emirimu
nabo bonna nja kubakolako, Mukama mbeere, sirina muntu gwentya.
Okibe abawagizi bo ababadde bakutunula nga maama
bonna bagambye tebansobedde, bonna bankubira amasimu bagamba mami sirina bendese batono nnyo mpozi ey'abakulu abamu, nze ndi muntu akkiriza mu.
All right. So, given your praise for Mr. Mpuga's selection of the shadow government, should we believe what Honorable Sevugwao is talking about? Is she a hero or a villain? Mr. Wilobo.
I will not blame Mami Semugwao, as they call her. I will not blame her a lot because you see, over the years, when people grow older into this political spectrum, they grow perspectives, and those perspectives they mix and mingle them with their own personal interests as well, although the public interest is at the back of their minds. Now, people of integrity like Sebugwao, from all the years she has served in the opposition leadership, you would not blame her for her decisions based on her age and based on so much that we actually don't see in the opposition arena. There is quite a lot of rot that is in the opposition that we do not see, and if it is opened upside down, we would be alarmed. And her decision and choice to exit at this time when there is quite a lot of mix and there is a lot of confusion, not even confusion, I must say. There is just a struggle for dominancy. The opposition is just suffering from dominancy crisis, whereby they see losing grip, just like the opposition also they fight for staying in power as the top opposition parties. They hold the umbrella of number one until when they have lost grip to the new entrant, that is in the names of Kyagulanyi Robert, who came up with his small idea. An idea became a party became now the shadow cabinet. It shows you right from the beginning of FDC there's been that exodus of top and influential people in FDC into the ruling government. But you do not see much of the top people in the ruling government except for the Mugisha Muntu, and it is stopped at the time of Mugisha Muntu and Kiza Besigye. Those were the topmost people that left NRM to join the opposition, but it is not seen that the people are moving from the ruling government to join the opposition, but it's vice versa. Now, it speaks a lot into what goes on in the corridors of the opposition power line, where the dominancy is what creates this desperation of people feeling like they have exhausted all their energies, resources, and time in building a struggle in the opposition, and yet the struggle is far-fetched, just as they have backbenched FDC currently. So you would really see how you would excuse Sebugwao for taking her decision because age is not on her side. She feels she has not satisfactorily achieved her ambitions in terms of serving Ugandans, as she claims, but also to fulfill her personal interests in terms of service. Now, it gives you a mindset that the dominancy of FDC, which is not anymore visible, it is strong, yes, it has structures, but it is not vibrant enough to silence the young population that has just come out with the sentiments and all these other ambitious young population right now. So it is the Sebugwaos who are the decision makers and the foreseers of progress at FDC. If you see them making such decisions, which means there is a problem with the road, and it speaks certain things into what we are not seeing. And for me, I feel that I would not criticize her for taking that path and that choice, because you see, leadership is a choice, and sometimes you can be in the ruling government, much as it's rotten, but you can choose to serve your people diligently. And we have seen people who have been doing that with integrity. And
that's very interesting. That's very interesting. I'm going to call in Mr. Mitala to interject here. And as you come in to interject, I wonder if you can give us some insights why it is okay for Mr. Mpuga, for example, to have a diverse cabinet, but it's never okay for Mr. Museveni to reach out to opposition figures and invite them into his government. Does that also mean, as Mr. Wilobo has indicated, does it, because I think Mr. Wilobo makes a very, very good point that is always taken for granted. The idea of self-interest in public service. I don't think that idea should be taken for granted at all. And I know most Ugandans will not appreciate that idea. But in politics, it's not just about public service. There's also self-interest for most people. People decide to support left-wing politicians because they are self-interested in those particular ideologies. Other people who are more conservative also tend to be that conservative because there's some sort of personal story that leads to their leaning, either right-wing leaning or left-wing leaning. Now we don't have those kinds of leanings in Uganda. We have the NRM, which is now the establishment, and then we have the FDC, which has lost clout now, and then we have the new National Unity Platform Party, whose ideology I'm not exactly sure where they stand. Some people might say that they are very left-wing, but until it is completely defined, we are yet to know where they really stand ideologically, besides the change slogans. I wonder what your thoughts are, Mr. Mitala, on that idea.
I think the comments of the lady there, Muchala Sebugwao, are quite very interesting. This is not going to be a critique of her because I'll be very fair. You know, I don't know the woman very much. She said what she says. She cited her reasons why she feels she can best serve the people's interests by joining the establishment. History will judge whether that decision was the correct decision or it wasn't the correct decision. I think for me, you've got to take it at the track record of President Museveni as of whether really he's got his own agenda. I think everybody now agrees that the man is the most brilliant politician that possibly Uganda has ever produced, because for some reason he's managed to play his game so brilliantly. He's merged a number of characteristics together, you know, the forceful characteristic and then the persuasive characteristic, and he's got lots of mechanisms, you know, at his disposal, you know, by which he can be able to compel people to do things that you don't expect them to do. And for those who remain actually very, very robustly solid and stand on their principles and say, no, regardless of what the attractions of tippings of power seem to provide, I'm better off, you know, positioning myself in this particular, you know, situation in order to pursue my ideas, my ideologies, and so on and so forth. You really have to credit these people. It's not an easy thing, you know. The state, and being in a state, I think being in state as a party in power brings quite a lot of advantages, because you've got the advantages of getting things done when you want to get things done. As long as, you know, you've got the support of the leadership behind you, you can get lots of things done by aligning yourself to the government. And I think this is sometimes where you've seen notions like where people have, the president has been at public forums and he has said, you know, you send me people that I can work with so that I can be able to give you what you want. Whether that's what Mrs. Sebugwao represents or that's what her aspirations are, I don't know, because as I said, I really don't know the woman. But I only go by the track record of so many, you know, eloquent, well-capable leaders, respected, you know, statesmen and stateswomen who have stood in her feet before, in her shoes before, and they have crossed the line and gone the other end, and they have ended up with the Bioya Bianswa. There is quite a number of those, you know. I don't have to name them. You've got Betty Kamya. Who doesn't remember Betty Kamya? Who doesn't remember Mama Mavila? Who doesn't remember, you know, the list is endless. There is lots of brilliant people who have been tapped from the opposition and they have been attracted, you know, to the glamour of being, you know, being part and parcel of the state, only to end up with bitter disappointments. I do hope that she does not get disappointed at the end of the day, because the reality is that.
But how do we measure disappointment? How do we measure disappointment? Is disappointment serving for one term? And is, for example, Betkamya and Nachinji were appointed in the previous cabinet, the most previous cabinet. They served for the entire term. Would you say that that was Bioyavianswa?
That question needs to go to the constituencies which they serve, because those are the people who are most best suited to answer those questions, whether they believe that they are the people they entrusted with leadership and guidance and be able to be their frontliners.
So I guess I'm trying to interrogate your reference to Bioyavianswa. What exactly did you mean by that? When you say Bioyavianswa, and then you reference
it's what it means. It's what it means in plain language. People have ended up in those positions and they have found themselves so frustrated, so useless, so powerless, and literally unable to achieve the sorts of things that they hoped they would achieve.
The reason why I'm pushing on that is because you referenced Mama Babida and referenced Betkamya. They are still serving in the government. They may not be in very powerful positions, but they are still serving in the government.
That's what I'm saying.
They are serving their constituents.
The best way to answer those questions is to go back to the people who had hope, people who had expectations, in those particular individuals. They expected them to accomplish certain accomplishments, and whether they whether they have actually lived up to the expectations of their constituencies. That's really the key issue. Because we are Henry, listen, we are not we have to
listen to each other.
I want to make this this observation without being interrupted. We are in a multi-party dispensation. And multi-party dispensation means that you support a political party because you believe in certain ideas and ideologies. If you leave that political organization and align yourself with another organization in an informal kind of arrangement. Now, if Mrs. Sebugwao or whoever it is has been tapped by the government with consultation with their own party leadership, and they have said, okay, we are releasing this person as a representative to go and join the state and be able to help the state to implement our manifesto as a political party of this color and shade, that's fair and well.
But when you say that that's fair, you have not answered the question that pertains to Mr. Mpuga tapping into FDC politicians without consulting the FDC establishment. This is something that Mr. Semju was talking about on the talk show on CBS regarding Mr. Mpuga tapping into FDC politicians without really consulting the establishment. So when you say that, when you make that reference, you have to be fair. We have to be fair when you're making.
I think
it shouldn't be just Mr. Museveni. It shouldn't be just Mr. Museveni who makes the consultation with the establishments of other parties. Even opposition leaders should do the same thing. Like, if you're going to measure, we need to use the same yardstick to judge all politicians on the entire political spectrum of Uganda, as opposed to only using certain measures when we are evaluating Mr. Museveni and using other measures when we are evaluating the opposition.
This is my rejoinder, and I want to be very clear on this, is that the track record of President Museveni and the way he has worked with people who are from different or other political shades is not very glamorous. He has worked on the assumption that he's subduing them or he's buying them out, or if not so, those people are being compromised. That is the fact. It's not a question of ifs or buts. We know what has happened.
Does that mean that?
I'll take it back. I think the first broad-based government that Mr. Museveni had is the one that included Mr. Semwogerere. Because obviously in 1986, when Mr. Museveni came into power, he didn't have the he didn't have the clout, he didn't have the experience of managing government, and he needed people on whom he would rely. For instance, the case of Mr. Semogere, he relied on Mr. Semogere to sell his government abroad. And I think you remember in the first years of Mr. Museveni, I think that's 1986 to 1989. I think Paul Semogere was I think he was Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the job he was serving there was to sell Mr. Museveni on the international platform. And as soon as he had achieved that, then the need for Mr. Semogere was not there any longer. And if you remember the way
Mr. Wilobo, what are your thoughts on this? Unmute.
You guys are making very strong submissions. But the thing is, let us go back to the background of the shadow cabinet and the entire opposition makeup first for a minute. Mr. Mitala was trying to take you back to the time when Dr. Semogere was the leader of opposition. And that was like the entry of Museveni and post Obote. Now, at the time, Semogere made up the biggest and the strongest opposition status for that government at the time, until when Museveni came. And Museveni actually, and because the opposition then was a very big threat because of the militarization of the politics at the time, the opposition to government was treated as rebel activity. Now, the rebel activity mindset trickled in until when Museveni, of course, absorbed and dissolved the certain biasness and certain issues, and then created the multi-party kind of dispensation. Now, with that regard, that mindset of looking at opposition as the sole and the significant part of being or rebelling the government has gone into the population, into the people, as a very strong kind of thing that if you cross, it's like surrendering to the what? To the ruling regime. Now that mindset has not changed till to date. That's why it is set precedence in that anybody that works from the opposition with the ruling government is considered you are disowned immediately. But in actual sense, yes, it is actually in their constitution of multi-party dispensation and all those other things. But the purpose and the sole reason for multi-party dispensation was to create alternative policies, alternative ideas, alternative everything, so that we can collectively reason out issues. With whether you belong to green, black, red, and all these other things, we should be able to come together and reason on a round table and come up with issues. Now, what has happened in all these post Obote time and from the post movement multi-party dispensation times, we aligned ourselves to think that we cannot operate outside the opposition, which is wrong. Now that mindset has to be changed fast, and it has always happened that whenever somebody is solicited by the ruling government to serve the interest of Ugandans in the cabinet, for that matter, that person, of course, meets the highest level of criticism, and actually he or she becomes the center, the mirror of focus, where they want to see how that person fails. But also it is in the interest of the ruling government to weaken the opposition itself. It is not like as though President Museveni is doing opposition a favor, or they just want them to cross over. They simply, he's a tactical. When you are facing your opponent, President Museveni is a military person. He knows the warfare. So the best way to win your enemy is to befriend your enemy first. So when you befriend, bring your enemy closer, and then you turn them surrender. They surrender on their knees. So you bring the enemy closer. So the opposition, in the minds of President Museveni, I don't want to speak like a superstitious person, but in the political mindset of President Museveni, he looks at the opposition leadership as a threat and as war. So in other words...
Do you think Mr. Mpuga has the same mindset in choosing those... the FDC and the independents into government? Also,
I understand your insinuation and the point where you're trying to create that the opposition leadership and stronghold as a whole, by the virtue of being in opposition, we actually believe that they have one agenda, and that is to host or to take out the current regime. Now, with that in the background, we believe that if Mr. Mpuga appointed members of the FDC, DP, JEMA, and all these other political parties into the cabinet, it means that there is no any other reason why FDC is opposition if they do not stand in the biggest, they have the biggest goal of removing President Museveni. So if they do not want...
If that insinuation is true, also, if the speculation you're making is true, then where is Mr. Nsereko and Mr. Semju in the shadow government?
Not everybody will take part in the shadow government, and it is not upon the opposition to absorb everybody. I told you that. I told you that. Remember, President Museveni said, Mr. Mitala in fact reflected this earlier in his submission, that send us, Mr. Museveni always says this, send me people that I can work very well with. So leadership is more about how well does Mr. Mpuga work well with these people that are excluded. That is supposed to be interrogated, whereby I must be comfortable to work with you, Mr. SSALI, before I even work with you in the first place. So it makes sense. That's why you may not see, much as they are very competent, highly qualified, and very, very eloquent in terms of political ideologies, but they may not be a best match for the current cabinet.
I think just a very quick rejoinder on that. I think for me, I want to reject this idea, and I think George is referenced it very nicely. I want to reject this idea that you can only be effective, as an opposition politician if you join the government. That's a very kind of...
But that's not the insinuation I made. That's not the insinuation.
No, it's not the insinuation. It's absolutely, and I'm not saying that that's what you're saying. But
the question that I want you to interrogate, the question that I want you to interrogate is, if we are looking for effectiveness, if we are looking for public service to serve the people that we go into government or into politics to serve, if someone is competent when they are in opposition, why is it that when they join the establishment, they are perceived as incompetent or sellouts? On another note also, if we really are looking at people who are competent to do the work that is public service, why is it that people are not questioning? And I know Mr. Wilobo talked about the working relationship, right? Sometimes you don't choose the most favorable person to work with in government. You choose the most effective, the most competent. We all know for sure that Mr. Nsereko is a competent MP, probably one of the most competent MPs Uganda has ever produced. We all know that Mr. Nsereko is an effective MP. Where are they in the shadow government? And
I think I'm slightly uncomfortable with that suggestion, because my interpretation of that is you are saying that these are the only two people.
No. I did say they're the only two people.
But let's critique. Let us critique Henry. Let us critique the individuals that Mr. Mpuga has put on the table for us.
And I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why I'm saying that they're one of the most competent ones. The reason why I'm saying that is that when you look at Mr. Museveni's cabinet, for example, one of the ministers that has always been deemed unqualified to take on a ministry is Mrs. Janet Museveni. Now, when you look at Mrs. Janet Museveni and compare her to Brenda Nabukenya, shouldn't the shadow government be choosing people who are more competent than the established ministries? Do you compare? So, in other words, which qualification does Miss Brenda Nabukenya have that Miss Janet Museveni does not have? Right? So, I want us to actually interrogate these questions based on the reality on the ground. And that's why I told you that we must not use one yardstick to judge Mr. Museveni and a different yardstick to judge the opposition leaders.
I think you know, this is how I look at this matter. You know, we are in a multi-party kind of arrangement. The idea that people on the other side, and when I say people on the other side, I mean people in the opposition. I think George has already made reference to this. Their objective, their number one objective is to see a change in government, to see a change in the top leadership of the government. This is not that they want the government to fall or they want to have civil unrest or anything like that, but they want, and I think it's the yearning of the general public. People want to see a change. People want to see a different kind of leadership. You know? Come on the center stage, and maybe we could see things beginning to go a different direction. I have no doubt. I have no doubt in my heart whatsoever that the decisions, the selections that Mr. Mpuga has made are the most effective decisions in as far as he can see where he wants, you know, his objective to go. Whether he approached the Nserekos and the same Jews and whether they accepted to work with him or he didn't approach them, that
is not about Nsereka and Semju. Nsereka and Semju are just examples. I want you to interrogate this question on a macro level.
All right. My response is here is that the track record of Mr. Museveni is being a trusted person to work with you know, opposition people is not really the very best. There is always a calculated kind of agenda behind his actions. And I think George did refer to it. I think usually what has happened is that it's just like being on a football pitch. You cannot tell me that if you've got a team of 12 people and you know that Mr. X or Mrs. X is your best top scorer, and then the opposition team comes and nip him and takes him to play with them, and you tell me that you're going to be very comfortable with that kind of situation. In whose goal are they playing?
But you're comparing tomatoes to oranges right now.
No, absolutely. That's what it is. Because I mean, we've got to be practical when we are dealing with.
No, but you can't compare.
My issue here
public service. Politics is public service. Sports is not. There's a difference between.
My issue here is here. But my response to that is here is that the track record of Mr. Museveni is just very plain that it's very difficult to trust him when you work with him. People who have worked with him before, even people who were with him when he was at the start of his, military career or political journey, even people that started like that, they are no longer there with him. They are no longer there with him. And the reason why they are no longer there with him, the reason why they are listen. The reason why
you have to listen to each other. When I listen to you, you have to listen to me as well.
But you're not allowing me. You are not allowing me to finish my point.
You're making like 3 minutes.
Oh, all right. Let me listen to you. Let me listen to you now.
This conversation is not just about Mr. Museveni. If we need an effective country, we need to discuss issues beyond Mr. Museveni.
But then the question I'm asking, Henry, is that where is this idea coming from that the people who have been selected to be in the shadow cabinet are not effective or they are not competent for those positions?
No, I'm not saying that they're not effective or not competent. We need. So here's the thing: if you are going to interrogate issues on the macro level, we also have to go back on the micro level. So if you want us to go back on the micro level and start evaluating each and every shadow minister and compare them to the established minister, then we can do that as well, right? And then
I think let's give people a chance. It's too early days.
I know it is too early, but that's the irony. That is the irony. Why is it always okay to give opposition leaders a chance to grow, but it's not okay to give Mr. Sebugwao a chance to?
I'm getting confused here.
Even though she has been in opposition for 40 years, when she makes a step that now I'm going to serve my people within the establishment, especially after having given the NUP an opportunity to not put an opposition candidate against her, right? They decided to put an opposition candidate against her. Now she has made a decision that, okay, I still have to serve my people. I just cannot serve them in the blue or red shirt. I'm going to serve my people in the yellow shirt. And now it becomes a problem. Why is it always like that?
For me, that's not a problem for her. And I think I said it right from the very start that I wish her the best. I hope that at the end of her journey, she can reflect back and she can say that, I made the right decision to move away. That's entirely her decision to make. If she's comfortable, if she feels that she can be able to deliver on her agenda by being on the other side, that's perfectly okay with me. But if she comes back a couple of years later and she realizes that it was a mistake for her to move, as her colleagues before her have done, then that would be the total indictment for her.
Well, I think for me, there is where, Henry, you're missing the point from. Actually, when we centralize, this is the biggest problem why we cannot even achieve the Pan-African agenda in Africa. We have deliberately branded individuals and we have made them as the supreme qualified individuals to lead. But we have not taken into consideration and the account of making and nurturing these leaders and expanding the leadership base. That's where we go wrong as leaders. Now, going back to the point of the conversations that is creating contention in this particular platform right now. You see, let's go back to the time when Wafula Gutu was electing his shadow cabinet for a moment. During that time, this was a time when even Lukwago came out with this guideline for, and it was passed as a policy in Parliament for the guidelines of selecting and appointing the shadow cabinet. Now, it so happened that Lukwago proposed that a joint cabinet has to be in place, because remember, in the early 1950s there was only a single party, like say DP, in the opposition, which meant that the DP would be the one that is in leadership as a leader of opposition and in the cabinet as well. Now, this is a time when in 2014, when Wafula Gutu was selected as the leader of opposition at the time, he raised two issues. The first issue was the people who are eligible for the positions in these different respective political parties, they had issues internally with their political parties. That was issue number one. Issue number two, the people who are not eligible were bribing their ways or buying themselves into the cabinet. Okay? Now, those are all issues, because remember, these are not people living in their own world. They are living in, I told you, when you live near a garbage truck, you cannot avoid the stench. So, the political system in Uganda, inclusive of opposition, is actually having very serious patches that needs to be mended. However, in the current leadership, right from 2014, there was a guideline that required the elected majority party must extend a hand to the other political party. That was the first step in the guidelines by Lukwago. This is in the guideline of electing a shadow cabinet. They extend an invitation to make sure that they share issues and they share ideas on selection. They present, they send a call or an invite to the different various political parties to send the names, appointees. Now, when they send these open oppositions that they are willing to give out to the other political opposition parties, it means that they will fill out, the different political parties will fill out and return this form to the majority opposition party. And I believe strongly this is what was done. And if you remember that the NUP served FDC a letter of invitation for a discussion. And I also strongly believe this was supposed to be part and parcel of preparing for some of these things that we are discussing right now. But what happened with that invitation is also a question to be interrogated. Much as we want to interrogate why certain individuals are not part of this cabinet, shadow cabinet, can we also have answers why they were not able to answer or respond effectively to the invite of these letters? Now,
because there's this lack of a grand kind of coalition of like-minded people with a common cause. But at the moment, what we have is having people who are running around with random ideas. Everybody has got an idea of what they think is the best way of serving the people. I think that's kind of a misconception in some respects.
Yes. Now, if they were to really follow protocol and procedures, you remember that if they were to submit and reply and reflect that the feedback is that we are going to have a meeting that will discuss the agenda set below. This meant that the names of appointees will come out at the time, and they will discuss who to appoint in what position and in what capacities, and their numbers to play, just like a football match. And whoever will be put on bench will be understandable, and this will be collectively. Now, this will come back to the review of the office of the leader of opposition, and the names of the appointee, the proposed appointees will be consulted, and then the final appointment will be announced by the leader of opposition after the confirmation of the proposed appointees. Now, this is the set standard in the opposition structure. However, there was a breach right from the beginning, from the extension of the call until it was defiantly refused based on intrigue and based on certain bickering within the political divide called opposition. Now, if we are not answering the fundamental questions of the differences that has created this tension within the political opposition, we are not going to have a lasting solution of answering why so and so is not in the cabinet and why so and so is.
The thing is, this position shouldn't be lingering on just individuals, those individuals. I think what I'm trying to tickle your mind to think about critically is how we come up with these decisions. All the processes that we have aligned, have they been followed, for example, by the opposition? The leader of opposition, have the different establishments, where the different establishments approached when they were going to select the shadow cabinet as well. Can we interrogate? Because I assume that if we are having a shadow government, you mentioned earlier that the purpose of a shadow government is to come up with alternative policy measures that could help people. That's what makes public service effective. But I think you're also forgetting to address the issue of personal interest, which you raised yourself earlier on, Mr. Wilobo. So when we are having these political discussions, we cannot alienate those different nuances that come along with participating in political conversations.
But Mr. Sali, you're not being fair to my point. I critically and actually holistically expounded for you the point that there is a set standard that this particular majority opposition party tried to follow, but there was a breach along the way in terms of reception, because the reception, what you say may not matter to me, but how you say it, it holds the water in there. So these are human beings. We may forgive the flaws in there, but there is content that has been produced. Because remember, the aspect, the most critical thing is to make sure that we nurture new Nserekos, the new Semu Jews in the names of Malende. You get it? There is first time of everything, and whoever is appointed into this shadow cabinet, they even also have a challenge. Just as Mr. President Museveni appointed the fishermen, maybe they also appointed. So we may not, we may have this. Yes, please.
I think there is a problem that possibly, you know, people who are in the opposition do not really understand the challenge beforehand. Because if people really do understand the challenge beforehand, this business of crisscrossing here and there wouldn't possibly be happening. And I cannot even agree any more than what George is saying. Maybe it's a good thing actually for these people to be, you know, fished from the boat and taken somewhere else, so that it can create room for the other young people with new ideas, you know, because the same powers that we are hearing here, they have been on the scene for ages. They have been, and that's not a problem by itself. Their experience, their expertise, and their knowledge and technical know-how can still be deployed in other respects. But if they have been there for all those years and nothing is moving, maybe it's the right time for them to move to vacate those spaces and create, you know, an avenue to bring up new set of ideas, new leadership that represents the ideas of this generation. But I think for me, to come back to the issue that you've been raising here, the personal interests, you know, the public interest. Wherever there is a clash of those two domains, the personal interest must give way to the public interest. It is perfectly fine for all of us to have, you know, small egos, to have, you know, personal wishes, ambitions, and so on and so forth. But the moment there is a clash between the personal interest and the public interest, the personal interest must give way to the public interest. That's a standard. So I hope that point is very clear. And what I want to come back to is just very simple. Is that the reason why I'm taking this line is that personally, I have come to the conclusion that I do not think that Mr. Museveni is the right kind of person to be the head of state any longer. That's the conclusion that I have come to. I think he's done his part. Whether for the good or for the worse, he's done his part. The decent thing for him to say, and even his colleague, Eddie Tumwine, was on national TV 2 days ago, 3 days ago, and he was advising him. And you know, for such advice to come from Eddie Tumwine, among all people, to come from Eddie Tumwine and say to the big man that, hey, look, I think you're timing.
I'm surprised that you believe Eddie Tumwine's words.
Whether in whatever context, whether we believe it or not, he said something, and he said it publicly on record, and his body demeanor meant a lot, you know, because Museveni is not advisable. He has several advisors. None of them
is someone who has been in government for 35 years.
Absolutely. If it comes at a point, you know, there is always a time for everything. You know, this is the unique. Abaganda baine gye balwogera olugero nti okuwangala kw'emmese kwaleeta okulaba ku emmese yawangala nnyo n'esobola okulaba ku ddiba lya Kapa. Of course, it comes as a surprise that at this point in time, it takes the likes of Eddie Tumwine to be dropped from government and undressed, so that finally they start to realize that, hey, guys, I think there's a problem here. So that is the sort of scenario that we are dealing with. Mr. Museveni has done his part. He has done it well, or he hasn't done it well. The time is now for him to seriously think about a Uganda without him, so that a new set of leadership, a new set of generation can begin to emerge and plan for the national way forward. That is really important for me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mitala.
This is the state of the nation. Rifa Uganda. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The state of the nation with Henry SSALI.
I had a rejoiner.
Oh, you want a rejoiner?
Yes. I was missing on the Tumine's commentary. For me, in my side of assessing Tumine's comments, and because that was not just comments, that was a speech. And being a speech, I do not think that it was not even a verbal speech, it was a written speech. Now, let us analyze that speech for a second. Eli Tumwine is speaking certain echoes of voices. But there are two versions in that echo. There is echo of the people behind him as Eli Tumwine, because these are people who are very influential. This is a man that fired the first bullet of the struggle. So he speaks with a lot of authority. That is one. Number two, he also has a backup, because you cannot just come out with such statements and you know the person that you're serving. There are two versions that I will analyze this with. The first version is, it's a message from a collection of or a group of people, and I would imagine maybe it's the Army Council. Okay, now the Army Council, of course, is constituted with so many historicals and also people of influence in the army, but they are silent, and those that are also who oversee a lot of happenings in the army. Now, this reflects two things: time is up, and they are tired. So Eli Tumwine is like a conduit that is airing these echoes. However, he is not alone, and based on how he packaged this message, and if you see how he's emphasizing these points, it shows you that there is a particular rupture of relationship. There is a rupture of how things must work. I do not even see this message as a grievance message, because he was not included in this cabinet or whatsoever. I do not think, in the person of Eli Tumwine, much as he loves power, there is a point that you reach as an elderly person when your children sit you down and advise you. And it is not something that is coming from, it is something that is well sought out and well thought through, and something coming from deep. Now, President Museveni will have a very serious pressure moving forward, because anything that President Museveni will not want is anything that creates division in the army, anything that creates a turmoil within the army, grievance within the army. That's why most of the colonels and generals have been dismissed. We have seen what Sejusa went through when he came out with the dossier about the Muhozi project. You know what happened. He was arraigned and he went into exile and came back, and all these other things. Up to now, he's not nowhere to be heard. He was silenced.
And if precedent is to be followed, Mr. Eli Tumwine used the wrong forum to air out, harmful propaganda. Therefore, he should be arraigned in the military, courts to be able to answer for those insubordination kind of whatever you call it.
But this one now takes me to the second point, the second version of it. The second version of it is that if he is making a precedence in this kind of forum, as you're saying, and he has to be aligned, and we must see something happening to Eli Tumwine moving forward. If nothing happens, which means it's a diversion. Now, the diversion in which way? There is a lot of fallout in terms of trust, both internally and externally, and with the population. The population has lost trust in the regime, and they are yearning for change. And the yearn for change creates conversations. Conversations now create what we are seeing. Now, when a person of influence and a historical like Eli Tumwine comes out and speaks authoritatively the way he did in terms of reflecting the need for change, the need for transition to occur, it creates some form of love for the regime, knowing that, okay, I think these people are now realizing they are tired, they must get moving, and it will at least seize certain form of political position pressure that would build moving forward. But as they build their own version of the real transition, because yes, there is transition that must take place. Museveni is not growing any younger, and you can analyze from his speeches. He has lost the authoritative speech. He has become the grandfather speech. You've ever listened to an elderly grandfather speaking? He loses the point and goes into narrating a story of 1986. In 1986, until when you lose the track of the point where he was actually making. Now, it means that the transition is inevitable in the current status of Uganda. And just like in Zimbabwe, where they did a coup, a military coup, and then of course, Mr. Mugabe didn't want that, was actually opposing that, to negotiate even. But he was brought back and he was advised and told, your age has gone, and given lots of reasons. And besides that, it was handover. It was not a military coup. It was a handover of power from this within the same. It's like it's the old wine in a new bottle. And there is nothing that has changed that much in terms of structure, leadership structure in Zimbabwe to date, because Emerson Mnangagwa is still the same, in the same party, same ideologies, same everything. So I would not be surprised if Eli Tumwine is speaking these things. He's simply tuning Ugandans that, hey, time has come, and we are here we want to go. Let us prepare for this. It's just a messenger. Prepare the way.
Prepare the way. Prepare the way. Let us go into the last question. Mr. Mitala, should international agencies cease giving Uganda aid?
That's a very tricky one. I'm not quite sure. It's a very tricky question to come to that one. There is a valid reason for aid going to any place where it goes to charity, because these places, they benefited a lot, from exploiting, our continents and our countries. And I think the aid that they are giving back is just to be able maybe to compensate, for what was taken away. And also the aid that comes in plays a very strong part, a very important part, in the day-to-day, well-being of our people. So I wouldn't necessarily be advocating for the suspension of international aid. I think where we have the problem is that we have aid in the wrong contents. Aid that's coming in on the premises of buying tear gas and buying weapons as if we are preparing for war. These things are being used against people for
But
no particular
do we,
reason
do we
than
really know that they use aid money to buy tear gas? Can
I
we
guess
put a
so.
finger on that?
I'm speculating. I don't have the facts on me, but I wouldn't be surprised that that's what happens. You know, because otherwise, then you'd be asking that all the money that comes into the country in aid, where does it go? Because usually it disappears. It doesn't get to do what it's meant to do. If it went to do what it went to do, then obviously there would be a very serious uplifting of the well-being of our people. But that doesn't seem to be happening. On the contrary, lots of our people depend on the remittances that people in the diaspora, either in the Arab world or in Europe or in Asia, wherever Ugandans are working, they are supporting their families and their people back home in so many different ways. And the level of remittances that is going there has got a direct effect, much more than the aid that goes into the various international agencies. So I'm really at pains, to make a clear judgment on that. I would think that there is need for those who are providing aid to ask for greater accountability, and maybe to find a mechanism, by which that money can end up in places where it's more needed. Because I'm saying that in many situations it ends up in places where it's not actually needed, and then at that point it's pointless. So that would be my submission on that.
Mr. Wilobo, your submission.
Well, personally, I think foreign aid is a necessary evil, and I really strongly believe that in the past 20 years, Uganda has had, of course, some reduction in foreign aid. But if you look at some of these aid clusterizations, they have also gone from, of course, increasing the economic development to now becoming centers for individual enrichment. But there is no country in the world that does not have corruption tendencies. However, in terms of understanding the depth of foreign aid, we do not have to lose focus and think that foreign aid is only used for particular things and all this money is squandered. No, the foreign aid comes in terms of there is one that comes, of course, particularly for military support, because remember the different development partners come with the different interests. Uganda is very strategic, both in East and Central African Republic. It's very central to very many development partners in terms of peacekeeping, in terms of security, and all these other aspects. So they receive this aid in terms of training, because some of the trainings that Ugandan army officers receive, they of course evaluate it as money, as aid. So they must be trained, they have to have some artilleries and all these other things. These are all requirements of a state. And we do not have to demystify the fact that this aid is relevant. Yes, it is relevant. And any country, the security is always at the forefront of their expenditures. And some of these expenditures, because Uganda is having the interest of other development partners and countries in Uganda, creates the trickling in of that foreign, what we are calling aid for military. Now, when you when you go deeper into the humanitarian aid also has the clusterization, which would be a budget line that comes right from through their dispensing agencies, and it is not like as though the way we are making it sound to Ugandans is like entirely Uganda is entirely 100% supported by foreign aid. It is wrong to have that notion. But we also think that foreign aid is actually the one that is making everything we see in Uganda stand. It is also wrong. However, the foreign aid comes with clusterization that I've just mentioned, that there is military, there is humanitarian aid that comes with need, and they are also dispensed through some of the agencies. For example, USAID, all the money that comes because of the previous experience in the past 20 years, the experience has showed the squandering of money, foreign aid that goes into the government straight away. By the individuals. Now they use the agencies to dispense to the other agencies that dispense to the other agencies that dispense now to the population in terms of supporting poverty eradication, in terms of livelihood training, at least making sure that health and all these other aspects that make up the livelihood of Ugandans. Then there is aid that is meant entirely to boost the economy. The economic status, like because the biggest boost that has happened post Obote, I mean post the war, was enormous because Uganda the economy was really crumbled, and yet there was a lot of foreign interest in Uganda, so they needed to be boosted enormously to pick up the economy. Now it has also.
What are your thoughts about the conditions or the preconditions that usually come with structured adjustment programs, which also come in a form of aid?
Well, there is nobody that will give you money and tell you that go and eat and get satisfied and stay safe. It comes with conditions. No one will give you money and wish you that you will not have something in return. Somebody, just like we are from speaking about self-interest. These countries that give aid to Uganda have self-interest. And it was unfortunate to have President Kyagulanyi mention certain things without information, because USA has interests in Uganda that you cannot take away, much as they would. You want to create an economic seizure of the country to create a political movement. But it's also wrong to insinuate that aid, when they seize aid, then things will not operate in Uganda. And then also, if you look at the same, I know Mitala wants to respond very quickly, but let me finish this point that aid money, yes, there is aspects of corruption and all these other things, but there is aid that was channeled rightfully and they have worked for the purpose that it was meant for. And then you will not look out for only the wrong apples, but you must look at the fruits of some of this aid money. The aid actually increases the GDP of a country, and you cannot just use, because there is fiscal system that make up the calculation, that the requirement. And because we tend to include the foreign aid into our GDP, now that is where our government goes wrong. So aid entirely is supposed to reduce government expenditure, but increase the tax base, because this is the baseline. These are the conditions of this foreign aid. It has to reduce the government expenditure and increase the government revenue that can be able to support its people. Now, this is entirely the purpose of the what? But because we have very, very cunning people in terms of corrupt individuals and corrupt leadership in Uganda, some of this aid is channeled and diverted, but it is not entirely, because this aid is not coming as now we have given you money, this is the money. No, it comes with the clusters of utilization. It is not as though this aid is just a sum of money given to the government to use it randomly. No, it is not. It comes with the set target budget lines, and these days it's even more strict. And I believe that the changes that, of course, USA, with experience, there are changes that are always coming up. And for me, what you would advocate as economic seizure, instead, because there is also how these foreign countries benefit from Uganda. Because if you look at trade, Uganda is a participant in in the Central African Republic, the market that supplies the US supplies North America, supplies Europe, and supplies other countries. Now, being a member country of some of these market regions and areas creates a bigger stake for the foreign aiders. They provide us a responsibility. So basically, we must clear out the notion that when you seize aid, the state must collapse. No.
Mr. Mitala, can Uganda be really independent with all the aid that comes along from international agencies?
I think they would struggle without that money. There is quite a big chunk of our national budget that can only be accounted for by the international aid that we receive. So if that portion was taken away, you know, I think there will be serious problems, and the problem will arise in maybe increased taxes, you know, and so on and so forth. So definitely, it would affect the country in so many different ways. I think what I wanted to add is
my question is: do we really need aid? Can we claim to be independent when we rely so much on aid? Or does Mr. Chagulanyi has a point in asking these guys to take their aid away?
I think he has a point by asking that the aid that we receive must be, you know, followed by some form of accountability and respect for basic, you know, rules of engagement. I mean, even when you go to the bank and you request for a loan, you have to give a reason why you're asking for that loan. Either you want to buy a car, home improvement, or whatever, and the bank would expect, although they are not going to police it, but they would expect that their money is being put to good use. So ultimately, there is a reason, there is a good case for accountability, and also to ensure that, you know, the funds that are received into the country, they benefit, you know, the common man, you know, in a more useful manner than what we've kind of become accustomed to. I don't think the country would collapse, but I think it would create serious, you know, budgeting issues, and maybe that would cause some kind of political rupture in the country. But I just want to add on very quickly that I think George needs to understand, or George would already be aware that, you know, the aid where the countries that are sending aid to our countries, you know, the citizens of those countries, they are very much alert, you know, to the human rights violations and atrocities that are taking place across elsewhere, and therefore they are placing a lot of pressure on their governments to ensure that, you know, there is a degree of accountability on whatever taxpayers' money is sent to go and help other people elsewhere. I don't know if that answers your question.
Mr. Wilobo, your response to that?
You see, Mr. Chagulanyi is right about one thing that I listened to him carefully, that the West has to drop the hypocrisy of paying a deaf ear to the atrocities and the injustices that are happening in the countries that they fund. And in that regard, of course, I concur with him 100%. Where I deviate from is insinuating that stopping aid will actually change too much, because there is a lot of interests that are in this aid. Because you see, today's world, we are not in, we are enclosed in a global village where there are so many countries out in the West that are scrambling for the same interest that maybe United States wants. And if United States of America is not willing to provide the aid that Uganda wants, Uganda will run to China. But because the USA wants to, of course, keep China out of Uganda, they must be able to. So there is a lot of play around foreign aid that we must pay attention to. But most importantly, I want you to refer you to there are two categories. There is the short-term kind of shocks that we need to understand. That you see, the spending of these countries to this to Uganda as a less privileged country and a poor country, for example, does not come by coincidence. it comes by virtue of the fact that there are also contributions that Uganda is making towards these developed countries that are giving out the aid. So, and also remember that, let us not forget that some of this aid is coming as actually loans, but deferred loans. And the Ugandans, as Ugandans, will have to pay this money after a very long time. But it's because of the fact that some of the monies that come in as aid to rescue situations, we are just from talking about the aid money, the 4.3 trillion that came in to rescue the situation of COVID, that does not have very clear accountabilities. Actually, these are the kind of offers and responsibilities that this Kyagulanyi is trying to create as an awareness to the West that, look, your money is being wasted. Yes, good. How is it being wasted? Without any fundamental, yes, you can say, okay, there are people are killing, all these other things, but you do not have substantive evidence that really proves your point. Because when these people reach out to Ugandan government to account for, let's say, the money that might have, they will be provided accountability, and the development partner will be like, no, they are good. Nothing. So, there is no query.
So my question is then, you mentioned earlier that some of this aid that is accorded to Uganda helps supplement the national budget.
Yes.
So if that is true, and we are really looking for a new Uganda, we are at a point where we have over 500 members of parliament, each of whom is going to get over 300, I think it's 320 million shillings for the cause. Do you think it was reasonable, even though the shadow government is really slim compared to the established government? Do you think it was reasonable for the opposition to create a shadow government which will also benefit from some of the aid that is being asked to be seized?
To answer your question directly, some of the foreign aid donors always hope that their effects or the money will contribute to the development of the country, but only to fill resources that are missing in areas or sectors that they see as relevant. Okay, so this aid does not come, let's say, to pay salaries of MPs for that matter. However, because of our dubious system, of course, we mix and mingle. It can find its way into payment into the public service payment of salaries and all these other things. However, because foreign aid will often be distributed through the state, understanding its effects, by the way, sometimes can be understood in how you see the physical behavior of the country. Because sometimes when there is a high expenditure by the government, in terms of right now where they are going to be figuring out money from the taxpayer to pay over the 500 MPs, it means that the government will be spending so much, but the revenue, the income into the government is less. Now it dictates the need for more aid. Now that is how the aid money finds itself into being mismanaged and mishandled into paying salaries and boosting the salary need of these politicians. Now, with that said, of course, Uganda will never have a time where they will shut the doors of aid. The best that I'm sure and very confident about is that the door of aid will be shut from them, but they will always open another door for aid.
Mr. Mitala, your response to that as you wrap up this conversation.
George raised a few issues. I'm not exactly very sure whether that's the way I understand them. I think aid is different from the loans that we get from the international monetary organizations and the World Bank and so on and so forth. That comes in as an entirely different kind of route. And I think we've had a few instances where in the past, the international monetary organizations they have kind of but never to Jackie Band, never to Sonyiwa, they have pardoned us of those dates, only to find ourselves back in a very kind of different, highly indebted kind of situation. And the question that gets to be asked is that where, does this money go to? Who really has this money? Because that money does not filter into the lives of ordinary people, Very little has changed in terms of the ways of lives of our very ordinary people. If you leave the suburbs of the city and go deep into the village, people always talk about roads and so on and so forth. But these things do not trigger. They don't trickle down into the lives of our ordinary people. And I think that's where I do really have a problem. But as I said before, I am not an advocate for the suspension of aid, because I know that there are ways in which it can be beneficial to some people in terms of, especially if it's well targeted. The problem arises where we've got this kind of blanket kind of, billions and billions of thousands and thousands of money that comes into the country, and the politicians just help themselves and, they do as they please without anybody, paying any particular attention. And I think the message of Mr. Chagulan, asking the international community to stop the hypocrisy and pay special attention to the human rights violations in the country. It is a legitimate call, which I do support. We cannot close our eyes when these sorts of things are taking place and discussed. I think that's all I could say on that. In terms of my wrap up, if you want me to wrap up as well, I want to say that I think as Africans we are optimistic, and I think the optimism of our people has not gone away. It is projected that when the pandemic is gone, our economies will expand slightly by up to about 5 or 4% or something like that. So there is hope, on the horizons. It's heartbreaking when we are losing people, especially very young people. COVID was supposed not to kill, young people. It was a disease for the elderly and the vulnerable, those who had underlying conditions. But we've ended up in a situation where we are losing, quite very young people, and it's very heartbreaking. I've heard about a medical doctor, who's passed away today, and it's just heartbreaking. Every little news that comes through, it leaves you really in some kind of desperate situation. As a final note, I think people really need to identify where they belong in terms of their political ideology. If they want to serve the people, they really need to identify who they are serving and how best they can do it. I do not believe, and I don't buy into the mantra that you can only do so much in terms of serving your people, advancing your political ideology by, selling yourself out to the oppressors. I think that's all I can say on that.
Mr. Wilobo, the world. Response and wrap up. Unmute.
Wrap up on the foreign aid discussion. It's important for us to understand that in other countries around the world, around Africa, actually foreign aid has worked for them. In Ghana, for example, in the same year of 2016, you will find that for them they were able to use international foreign aid to boost their revenue, but also it allowed them to increase government's funding without actually borrowing money from International Monetary Fund and all these other sources. But it is the discipline of the leadership there that created some of these things. And if you see, in the same year, Zambia could not do anything. They went into China to look for aid. So I believe that leadership plays a pivotal role in management of some of this aid, and because we tend to calculate our physical years, our physical budgets and calculations around aid, it has created a negligence of looking around for our own increasing our own revenue base and increasing now our borrowing nature and as a country, and the debt level has reached so high that it may be difficult for Uganda to pay the debt even after 50 years. So for me, as a wrap-up, I would also speak into the COVID-19 situation that as Ugandans, we shouldn't lose hope. We have had so many epidemics. These epidemics, we have fought them so hard. There was AIDS, there was cholera, there was Ebola, and all these were very, very dangerous diseases. And we are always resilient as the people of Uganda, and we believe that we are going to walk through this. Those that are in hospitals and those that are really looking for hope in terms of taking their loved one for support and help, medical help, we pray and encourage that we continue. And also we grieve with those that have lost loved ones, and most importantly, let us keep ourselves and those around us safe. But I also want to encourage people to make sure that when you are sick, inform those around you that you are sick. Coronavirus requires you to at least declare to that person close to you to make sure that he is safe, and you keep those around you safe so that you also stay alive. Because the more you infect more people, the more you may also not survive. So let us keep safe and stay safe. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wilobo. Thank you so much, Mr. Mitala. And thank you so much to our viewers who are always following us with great comments. Thank you so much, Joelia Naiga, Catherine Bate, Patricia Namialo, and all the others that I haven't been able to mention. Thank you so much for joining us. We want to send our condolences to all the families that have lost their loved ones during this pandemic. We pray that your families are empowered and given comfort by the love of God. We pray that you are comforted by your loved ones. And as George has mentioned, if you are sick, please tell the people around you so that they can best take care of themselves. Thank you so much. I want to make a disclaimer that all the names referenced in this podcast are just mere examples to our discussion and are not necessarily targeted politicians. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the State of the Nation. Have a great weekend.
This is the State of the Nation. Rifa Mwanga. We are deliberate, we are reasonable, we are uncensored. The State of the Nation with Henry SSALI.